we've got opening statements and then a 2-minute answer per question after that. We do have one initial question that everybody is prepared for in advance, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. After that, the next hour and 15 minutes will be the remaining 5 questions. So who's ready for question 4? So that the question is, do you want to require vehicle manufacturers to standardize onboard diagnostic systems and provide remote access to those systems and mechanical data to owners and independent repair facilities? So first, I was supposed to flip a coin here to decide who goes first, but I think we're going to let Kenny and Mark go first with their opening statements.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. First, let me say thank you to the League of Women Voters of Maine and to the Bangor Daily News for hosting this important forum tonight. I also, last night, gave great praise to Secretary of State Ballot. The only problem was she wasn't there. So I want to take this opportunity tonight to say thank you. She's run an incredible program with our ballot questions this year. As you know, there are 8 questions, and it is no easy task to administer all of those questions. And her and her staff have done a phenomenal job. It's been very taxing, and we all owe her a great debt of gratitude. My name again is Mark Gallagher. I'm here with the Maine Automotive Right to Repair Committee. I'm joined by Kenny Bridges, who is a world-class technician in auto repair, who is employed right here in Bangor. I will tell you that question 4 is solely about your right as a person who owns an automobile to choose who repairs your vehicle. The way of the future for auto repairs here in Maine will be through a process called telematics. And telematics is the exchange of information from the group that you bought your automobile from, the automakers and the auto dealers, to a platform that will give the information to third-party independent auto repair shops. There are 1,300 auto repair shops here in the state of Maine. What our opponents would like to do is not be able to give you the choice by not giving the independent auto repair shops the codes that give them the ability to repair your car. And so what this question will do is make sure that they do not have and create a monopoly. Now, why would they want to not be able to provide these codes? Because 50% of the revenue that's generated by auto dealers is in the repair of your cars. That revenue, your car, it costs you between 30 and 40% more to have your car repaired by an auto dealership than by an independent auto repair shop. If they don't create this opportunity to have a monopoly on auto repairs, studies have shown that it will cost $750 billion to the automakers and the auto dealers. That is why they are fighting us so profusely. I will conclude by saying thank you again for being here tonight. We look forward to your questions, and I humbly ask you to vote yes on question 4.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate the opportunity. Better? Oh, there I am. I want to start with a little hypothetical. I want you to imagine in next cycle, someone running for governor, and all of their money came from out of state. Not 75%, not 80%, 99% of their money came from people outside of Maine. How would that make you feel? Well, I say that because that's what's happening on question 4. And don't take my word for it. Go to the Secretary of State's website. She has a great bar graph, a pie graph of in-state versus out-of-state money, but it doesn't look like a pie graph. It's just one big blue circle because 99% of the money on this has come from out of state. And that's because all of the money for this has come from it hasn't come from main repairers like Kenny and others who have banded together to petition their government for a change. It's come from auto parts retailers, names of which you all have shopped at, know, and they're after direct access to your vehicle. They want to be able so that they can market to your vehicle and collect data for their own corporate interests. Automakers support right to repair. They make all the same information available to both dealers and independent repairers. How do we know this? Because 70% of repairs post-warranty are already done in the aftermarket. If repair information wasn't out there, they wouldn't be able to complete those repairs. How else do you know this? Earlier this year, we signed an agreement with 2 national groups who represent repairers to make sure that repair information was available today and in the future. Similarly, this year in Maine, we supported legislation LD 1911, which would have made it the law of the land here. We even created a website. Go check it out for yourself. OEM, the number 1, stop. OEM 1 stop. A place to get all repair data from all different automakers. Listen closely to their arguments. They weren't talking about a problem fixing cars today. They were speculating that maybe in the future, if automakers were sending this information telematically, maybe they wouldn't be able to fix cars. But the agreement we signed addresses repair information today. And the reason we have a challenge supporting this is because of the huge cybersecurity risk. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the agency that governs road safety, came out with a letter to automakers saying that not to follow Massachusetts law on which this is based because of cybersecurity risks. It would make roadways less safe. That is why we oppose this. It will make cars less safe, and it has nothing to do with the ability to fix a vehicle.
If you don't mind, Wayne, I'm just going to have you say right up front, because you're going to go first for this next question. So this first question was prepared in advance. Both sides knew about it, and it is, if question 4 is passed, what is the effect on the average car owner in Maine?
So there's 2 ways to look at this. One, there'll be no effect because the repair information is already available. The other side of that is you can look to Massachusetts. Massachusetts had the exact same ballot question of this in 2020, and it passed 75-25, which I'm sure my opponents here will point out. And then it was challenged in court. And 2 automakers, when faced with complying with this law, realized there is no possible way that they can comply with the law and also offer a cyber secure vehicle. So 2 automakers shut off telematics preemptively, not waiting for the end of the trial, just, hey, we can't comply with this, so we're just going to shut off telematics. That means no turn-by-turn directions, it cuts into your safety, because there's no way for them to offer this, these technologies that describe. And the thing that I didn't get to in my opening statement, this doesn't just say how that information has to be shared. It says how. It says how that data has to be shared. And that's the real challenge on this. That it's not just that it has to be shared, it's telling automakers the manner in which it has to be shared. And it has to allow direct access to the vehicle without any cybersecurity protections that the automaker now puts on the vehicle. If you've heard of ransomware for your phones or your computer, imagine that for your vehicle, because that's what NHTSA is concerned about. That's what MIT cybersecurity professors are concerned about. In the big picture, this isn't going to matter at all because repair information is already available. And the agreement we signed this summer revalidated that all the information will be available.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. Let me put this very simply. If yes on question 4 passes, you as an automotive owner will be able to choose who repairs your car. If question 4 is not successful, a monopoly will be created by automakers and auto dealers. Pure and simple. Let me just address a couple of things that Mr. Whitehoe had mentioned earlier. And Wayne is a fantastic guy. But he talked about out-of-state money for our side of this campaign. There's been one contribution made to his ballot question committee, and it's from a Washington-based special interest group that is run by Mr. White, who lives in Washington, D.C. I think it's insulting. Quite honestly, we went out and got 90,000 signatures in 21 days. We had the help of many of the 1,300 independent auto repair shops here in the state of Maine. Kenny Bridges is a phenomenal leader who's a local technician here. So I think it's insulting to say that this isn't a Maine-based authentic movement to give you consumers the choice on who should be able to repair your automobile.
So we are going to move on to the first question from the audience, which is what security issues are car owners facing if this is passed? And so I think that's going to maybe make sense. You guys can take it if you'd like. It's your turn.
Can I actually repeat that question?
Yeah. What security issues are car owners facing if this is passed? And I think, Mark, if you'd like to take a stab at it, and also Wayne, if you would, we could maybe step back and just explain to the crowd what we're talking about exactly, the telematics and the data involved.
Yes. So the future of automotive repairs is through a process called telematics. A platform is created. An automaker provides the information to the platform. The independent auto shop repair folks have access to those codes that give them the ability to figure out the diagnostics, what is wrong with your car. It is clear in our ballot question that the only information that can be accessed by the independent auto repair shops is about diagnostics and repairs. That is it. There will be no compromise in security if this ballot question is successful.
So not to make this a technology setup, the way technology and telematics works today, there's one connection to your vehicle. The data goes from your vehicle up to OEM servers, automaker servers, and then out to trusted third parties. You've all seen like OnStar, that you get in a car accident, data goes from your vehicle up to GM, and then they send it out to an ambulance to let them know you've been in an accident. What this bill does is change that fundamentally. And it says that every third party must have direct access to your vehicle. That doesn't mean going through OEM servers. That means direct access to your vehicle. And every single one of those connections is a point where cybersecurity can be hacked. Another place where cybersecurity can be hacked, every repair shop that now will have access to your data, which will include your location in real time when your vehicle is not with your shop. The shop will have that information in their computers. What are shops' cybersecurity protections? What are shops? Do shops have ITs? Do they have, gateways? Who's managing this information in the shops? None of those questions have been answered. It just says, oh, we'll just create something that the data will be able to go from the vehicle out to third parties. But it specifically says that the automaker cannot be the gatekeeper of that information. So we cannot, if this passes, be in a position to protect your vehicle from others getting access to it. And that's what this is all about. I'm happy to share this and NHTSA letter on this. You leaving early?
I was just waiting to respond. Thank you.
So Mark's going to get a minute to respond.
Thank you very much. Again, Mr. Weichel mentioned the Massachusetts referendum. This was their primary charge during that referendum process, and they lost 25%. He's brought so many red herrings from Washington that we could probably fill the Penobscot River. What I find insulting again is that we have 1,300 independent auto repair shops, and what he's claiming is they would be suspect to hacking and criminal activity, et cetera, et cetera. Does not mention that the same thing could happen under the repairs done at an auto dealership. I will say it's a moot point because, as I mentioned earlier, in this question, in this ballot question, the only information that independent auto repair shops could get is diagnostic and repair information.
For the record, Mark and I could do this all night, so if we wanted to just take the other questions and come back to this. So getting back to this, I'm from Washington, DC. I am. And I would much rather be home with my wife tonight. But I'm here because I have to be here to prevent them just pulling the wool over your eyes and just keep saying that this is about repair when it's not about the ability to repair. As for, I'm not ever suggesting, I have the most respect for repairers. None of you know this. I spend a lot of my time at repair conferences. I do a ton of work with repairers. I have the most respect for them. I'm not suggesting they would be the responsible ones for any criminal activity, but every point would be a place for potential hackers to get in. Do you guys remember there was a Target hack a bunch of years ago? How did they get into it? An AC repair person left a back door open into the network, and that's how they got in to hack. They hacked the AC company, which had a network into Target, or that's what could happen on every single point, and it does include your location in real time. When your car is not with your repair shop, that's what we're talking about. That is private information, and it should be a lot more sensitively handled than how it's been dealt with in the ballot question.
This is the last audience question that I have right now, so if anybody has more, better to hear from you than me. So if you have some questions, send them in. But so this question is, would successful vote apply to new vehicles going forward? Does it also apply to vehicles in the past? And so Wayne, I think you're the first for this.
Yeah. I don't think this needs a rebuttal. I can, this is only prospective. The way the language works, it gives automakers 1 year to comply with this language. It does not apply retroactively. It gives us 1 year to comply.
Thank you.
No rebuttal needed on that one. Okay. Well, again, if anybody has questions, send them up. But we've heard a lot about Massachusetts. So I'm wondering if you each can just sort of give a synopsis of what's happened in Massachusetts thus far and how it compares or contrasts to what would happen in Maine if this is passed.
Thank you. I just want to be explicitly clear. Our ballot question is about Maine. It's about Maine consumers. It's about giving you the choice of who can repair your car. In Massachusetts, the ballot question that was presented here passed 75 to 25%. Immediately, the automakers and the auto dealers sued the state of Massachusetts. The judge in that case ordered the attorney general to make the automakers comply with the law in June. Mr. Weichel referenced a letter that the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration put out saying that the automakers did not have to comply. What he didn't tell you was the federal government reversed that decision 2 months later and told the attorney general in Massachusetts that the automakers needed to comply with the voters' will. I will also say this, the Biden administration has been very clear since the beginning of your administration that one of their strongest principles was right to repair.
And the Biden administration pointed to automakers as the model that all other industries should follow because we are the gold standard when it comes to right to repair. In Massachusetts, yes, we challenged this information, the Ford case, because there was no way automakers could possibly comply safely to redevelop all of these vehicle systems to send this information to any number of third parties in the time amount given. No federal ruling has been made on that. That will eventually come. It will surely impact whatever happens in Maine because it is the same district area. Yes, there was a second letter to the NHTSA letter. I pointed out that NHTSA wrote all automakers telling them do not follow the Massachusetts law because there's no way you can follow it safely. And yes, there was a second letter. But the second letter talked about, well, maybe if you use Bluetooth technology, because then you would at least have to have physical proximity to the vehicle, so it cuts out hackers in Iran, Russia, North Korea, which is what MIT professors are concerned about. The word Bluetooth is nowhere in your ballot language, so that has nothing to do with what you are actually voting on.
Any audience questions hiding out there? Send them up if you got them. Kenny, you've been pretty quiet. Would you care to share with us why you're here based on your job, why you feel it's partly involved?
So we talked about, I'm from right here in the Bangor area. And I look at this as everyone should have the right to pick who repairs their vehicle. You go spend the better. You spend all this money on a vehicle, and yes, on this gives you the option to take it to where you want to get it fixed. When you look at some of the areas, we live in Maine, it's rural. There's areas, if you're up near Madawaska and you buy a new car, there's a chance you're gonna have to drive the car if you can, or have it towed 3-4 hours to the nearest dealership to get it repaired. And as you're driving or having it towed, you're probably gonna drive by your trusted mechanic you've used for years, or your technician, and you might not have that option anymore.
Thank you. That very quickly. Kenny is very humble, and I just want to add this very quickly, that if question 4 doesn't pass, Kenny is a world certified technician. If he goes out and buys $40,000 F-150, he won't be allowed to fix his own vehicle. Please tell me how that is right.
Mark and I are friendly, and I'll say that at the beginning because that was ridiculous fear mongering. The idea that you won't be able to fix your car or you won't have choice is ridiculous. This is Gary Martin. He runs Martin Motorsports. He's my mechanic. I don't go to a dealer. I fix my own car other times. There's nothing in here that says you won't be able to take your car anywhere. Mark has pointed to telematics information with this. Oh, what if information sent telematically? Not a single repair. Not one repair has been identified that you need telematics information to complete. And what they'll say is, yeah, but in the future, what about the future? What about the future? The agreement we signed this summer addresses it. The 2013 Massachusetts law that we follow around the country addresses it. They just like to ignore that we've already addressed this. We've already closed that loophole. And the reason is because it has nothing to do with the ability to repair vehicles. It's all about these other companies who pretend to be the main coalition, but all their money comes from out of state so that they can get access to your vehicles. It has nothing to do with the ability to make a repair.
So, did you guys want to talk there? Maybe get a bit out
Again, this is the second time that Mr. Weigel has tried to claim that our ballot initiative, which got 90,000 signatures in 21 days, is not Maine-based. The fact that we have 1,300 independent auto repair folks in the state of Maine, many of whom are big supporters of what we are trying to do. To try to say that it's not an authentic group is just laughable. I would also say this, and I'll point it out again, that Mr. Weigel's ballot question committee received one contribution. And again, that contribution was made by a special interest group on behalf of automakers and auto dealers based in Washington, D.C., where Mr. Weigel was.
But I don't hide that I'm from Washington, D.C. They claim to be the main right to repair coalition. All of their money has come from outside of Maine. And for being a special organization, if you look at who actually gave the money, there's a group called the Coalition of Auto Repair Equality. Gee, they sound nice. Who could they be? Well, it's AutoZone, Advanced Auto, O'Reilly, Napa. They're the ones who put all this money into this. This has nothing to do with choice. We signed an agreement with two of the biggest, largest, oldest repair associations in the entire country that get their money from repairers, not from the people who want to sell repairers tools and parts and other things. Repairers. And they stood up and said, we have the information necessary to complete repairs. We don't need all this extra data from consumers. We don't want all this extra data from consumers.
So that was the response to the response.
What's that?
That was the response to the response. And I know, gentlemen, I know we talk a lot about how friendly we are here, but we're maybe getting a little close to the line of some of the ground rules. So at least right up to them. So let's not go any further. There's been a lot of talk about sort of the state of the market and what it sounds like you guys fundamentally disagree on who has access to what and what different repair shops can do. But are there any changes that are happening now or in the future in terms of, are there things that Kenny can access right now, but that there are changes from various automakers or in the industry that he might not be able to in the future? I did as well, and it might make sense, Kenny, for you to take that first. But if Wayne's ready,
It really doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, that was to put this whole conflict to rest was part of the reason we signed this agreement over the summer with these two repair organizations. And it wasn't just focused on today, it was focused on making sure there was the ability to repair in the future. So that in the future, if an automaker was to provide this information telematically, which is what they, fearmonger around, it would be available. And we write that very clearly in the repair agreement. It's written very clearly in the Massachusetts law that's already being followed. So we think we've been very clear on that. Our members, look, if you can't get your car fixed, you're not buying that car again. There's a brand equity issue here, and our members get that. You can't just put a car out and then expect them only to go back to the dealer. 70% of repairs today are done outside the dealer network. So automakers have no incentive to cut into that. We want to make sure that safe repairs get done. We want to make sure that you can get repairs done anywhere you want. We make this information available. Now, the tough thing is, for Kenny and people he works for, they have to make a lot of choices. They can't buy every part and every tool from every manufacturer, so they have to make some concessions. Maybe they buy a third-party tool that doesn't really have all the features, but they do it because it services more vehicles than just one tool. And that's the challenge for repairers, is finding the right tool that services what they need. And that's the thing that often gets overlooked sometimes by repairers, that they say, oh, you have to go back to the dealer with it. Oh no, you just didn't buy the right tool. So if you bought a different tool, you'd be able to do that too.
Is that an option to buy the right tool? Oh, that better. I'm just talking, I'm like, you always have the option to buy the tools. You can pick like what you want to buy for a product for tools. But an example is replacing a part in a car. You have to buy a subscription. Then you have to buy another subscription. You can flash it. There's many pieces to go into that just keep on adding costs, which gets lower the consumer. I mean, having the option to put all this in one area is a win for us. And it's a win for consumers who may be able to diagnose vehicles.
So turning to a question from the audience, how much does it cost to get this information for a small local repair shop, and how much will it cost under the new law?
I will let the gentleman to my left address how much it would cost in the new laws. To the best of my recollection, there's nothing in there that actually speaks to cost. Currently in the marketplace, as I said, we're following a Massachusetts law that was passed in 2013 around the whole country. And within that, there is a reasonableness standard. And that's based on an EPA language. It's not great, but the one thing we did is in the Massachusetts law, and this was in our LD 1911 from this year as well, we made it so that shops could buy information on a daily, monthly, or yearly basis. So if you service a lot of Toyota products, you want to buy the annual subscription because that will be cheaper. But you service a lot of Toyota products and someone rolls in with a BMW, well, you're not going to buy the year long. That's why we allow them to buy a daily subscription. We want repairers to have access to the right information. So much so, we haven't pushed this in Maine yet, but we have tried this in New Hampshire. We tried to require that in any post-collision insurance-funded repair, that you have to use OEM repair procedures. Seems reasonable, doesn't seem like there should be a law on that. But we found that a lot of collision repairers weren't following it. So we tried to force that. It actually got all the way to the governor, we vetoed it. But how could we push that to mandate the use of OEM repair procedures if that information wasn't out there? And again, you don't have to know what the information says. Go check out www.oem, letter O, EM for original equipment manufacturer, OEM, the number one, stop. And you'll see a link to every automaker's repair information. You don't have to click on it and see what the actual information is, but we made it easy for technicians to go to one place. They don't have to learn every single different company's different rules.
I know that Mr. Weigel would like you to believe that that's a very generous offer by auto dealers to give the ability for independent auto repair shops to pay them to be able to pay to repair your vehicle. As I mentioned earlier, 50% of the revenue that is generated by auto dealerships in the state of Maine through independent through the repair of your vehicles. They, if they're able to create this monopoly and not give you the fundamental choice of who can repair your car, they could lose up to $750 billion, as many reports have stated. This is simply, and you know, Mr. Weigel would like to talk about all kinds of things like OEM procedures in New Hampshire and so forth and so on. This bill is about giving you the fundamental right, after you buy an automobile, to decide who can fix your car. Now you can decide to have a dealership fix it. You know, that is your choice. I would say that it's probably an important financial decision, but that is certainly your choice.
1 minute, and then you guys another. After that, we got one more question, then closing statements.
Just to clarify, just so you all aren't confused, I don't represent auto dealers. I represent an association that represents the automakers that manufacture nearly 98% of all new cars sold in the US, as well as major tier 1 suppliers and automotive technology companies, AV companies. We don't represent dealers. Often we fight with dealers. So we have no vested interest to make sure that dealers are profitable. As I already said, I don't go to a dealer. I have an independent shop that I go to. This has nothing to do with the ability to fix a vehicle. Mark keeps trying to boil it down to about choice, about choice. Go look up legislative docket 1911. We filed it. It's our bill. It supports right to repair. It does all the things that Mark's accusing us that we don't want to do. It guarantees that access, but where it stops short of is all of the cybersecurity concerns that come with the proposal that is in front of you for the ballot.
Mark, I know you only have 1 minute to respond, but could you maybe, I don't know if we had you specify who you're representing. We talked a lot about Wayne as representing.
Yes.
So if you could just clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I mentioned earlier that I'm here on behalf of the Maine Automotive Right to Repair Committee. I am a campaign consultant and I work with John Woodson in Portland. I will just say this, the bill that they presented had nothing to do with telematics. Telematics is the future of how you repair vehicles. They do not want independent auto repair shops to have access to those codes. They tried to codify that through a state law, through a bill, I apologize, and it didn't go anywhere.
That's a response to your response. If you want a response to it in your closing statements, which is going to come soon, you can. And so we have just one last question from the audience, and then we're going to go to closing statements. It's directed specifically at the proponents, but I assume you're going to have a response as well, but we're going to start with it. So for the proponents, can you identify examples of repairs that have not been able to be completed because of data access issues or future specific concerns?
The example I'm going to use is a simple flat repair. If you look at a owner's manual for Tesla Model Y, it says in there, if someone from a shop like mine, keep in mind, I'm an ASU world-class technician, that if I fix that tire and the tire light turns on after, that the consumer, there's a very good chance they're gonna have to drive back to Tesla or have Tesla fix it remotely for something that I'm more than qualified to fix.
So I should know, we don't represent Tesla. They're the 2% that we don't represent, along with Rivian and Lucid. But Tesla does have a tool that allows independent shop access to be able to do these things. And don't think, I mean, you can't see from there. I don't have analysis on my hands. I don't do this for a living, but I talk to a lot of people who do. And they tell me that all the information is available, and I take them at their word. Quick thing I wanted to get on Mark's last comment where he said the LD 1911 didn't address telematics. It did, very clearly. It said telematics information had to be provided if it was necessary for a repair, provided to a dealer, which that's their big thing, they want equal to the dealer, and not otherwise available through a tool. Necessary for repair, provided to a dealer, and not otherwise available. That closes the loophole. There's no chance that someone could send repair information and somehow they wouldn't be able to have access to it under those scenarios. It's necessary for repair. If it's provided to a dealer, and if it's not otherwise available, an automaker would have to make this available. Our opponents on this just like to ignore this language that has been around since 2014. And it was in the Massachusetts language, it was in our bill this year, and they just say, well, it doesn't address telematics. It does, it's right in the bill, just Control F, telematics, it's right there. They just like to gloss over it and say that it's not there.
In response, or are we good to move on to the closing statement? I believe it's your turn to go first if you'd like. Want some water?
I feel like we've covered a lot, and I appreciate your sort of listening and going back and forth with this tennis match. This is an issue I've talked about for nearly 10 years. We've won on this issue in legislatures in California, in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts. And then the proponents on this, not independent repairers, the AutoZones, the Napas, they realized they were not going to win in the legislature. So in 2020, they said, you know what, we'll go to the voters and we'll just go and we'll say, it's your car, it's your data, it's your choice. And we'll just keep repeating that. We'll just keep repeating it. And that's what it will become. And that's what's happening here in Maine. You know, this comment that, oh, we had 90,000 people sign on to it. Well, no offense to the Secretary of State. The question on this, I would vote for. It's a terrible question. It doesn't add the nuance to this. And you can see there's a lot of nuance. So I appreciate you sitting here listening to this. Just understand there's a lot more to this than just it's about choice. It has nothing to do with choice. It has nothing to do with the ability to make a repair. I work with repairers in other parts of the country. They don't have a lot of people here. They do have some. And they tell me all the information is available. And that's kind of a binary thing. It's either available or it's not available. So if someone tells you it is available, then other people are saying it isn't. The isn't is probably more a question of knowing where to find it, knowing how to access it, having the right tools, but that isn't access. That is just buying the right tools or having the right training. I go around the country, I talk about this for a long time. You can see Mark and I going back and forth, which, probably confused you on a lot of things. I always feel bad whenever I talk to the media on this issue, because I say one thing, the other side says another, and it doesn't leave, the reader any better off. Just understand, there's nothing in here that would create a monopoly. There's nothing in here that would somehow shut out independent repairers. Again, we made OEM one stop specifically so that repairers could get information. Why would we do that if we were somehow wanting to create a monopoly? None of that makes sense. We pushed legislation in New Hampshire and others in other states to require OEM procedures. Why would we do that if we somehow wanted to create a monopoly? None of that makes sense, because it's not about the ability to complete a repair. It's all about the ability to get to your data, where you go, where you drive, be able to market to you. So you go to a quick lube place and you drive near it and they can say, hey, we see you're 1,500 miles over for your oil change, and have it pop up on your screen because they have direct access. They can send it right to your vehicle. We see you're over your miles and you're 2 miles away from our thing. How about you come in? We'll give you a coupon. And that's going to pop up on your dash. That's what this is about. It's marketing. It's not the ability to fix the car.
Thank you again to the League of Women Voters of Maine, to the Bangor Daily News, to Matt Yonker for doing an excellent job tonight as the moderator. Thank you so much, Kenny, for joining me here tonight. Your expertise is critical to making sure that we protect consumers. I wish you could go for a law, for our referendum. This bill is simply about consumer choice. It's about Mainers who buy $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 cars, who then own those cars. This is about giving you the ability to decide who repairs that automobile. Could be an independent repair shop, the 1,300 that are here in Maine, the independent repair shops that sponsor Little League baseball teams, that are members of all kinds of different organizations in your community. Or you could bring it to a dealer, or you could fix it yourself. If question 4 does not pass, you will not have that choice. Pure and simple. Thank you for having us tonight, and please vote yes. I only ask you to vote yes on question 4.
Use it up here this time instead of leaning over. It might work better. So thank you all. I think that concludes our discussion on question 4. Hopefully, it sounds like everybody was pretty collegial to start, and hopefully we're walking away from the dais feeling the same way. But if we could have a round of applause from the audience. We're all set with you guys. Thank you so much. And we're going to move on to question 2 now. So Representative Nathan Carlo is going to join me up here. Inside, you can sit over here with me if you'd like, or over there. I won't be offended either way. So, question 2, I'm just going to read the question, and then we are going to have the representative who also is here, I believe, in a volunteer capacity with Protect Maine Elections, which is a PAC that has supported question 2. Am I getting that all correct? Excellent. So I'm going to read question 2 for us, and then we're going to ask him what it means. And so this is an act to prohibit campaign spending by foreign governments and promote an anti-corruption amendment to the United States Constitution. And the question is, do you want to ban foreign governments and entities that they own, control, or influence from making campaign contributions or financing communications for or against candidates or ballot questions?
Yes. Screen hear me if I have it sitting right here. No, yeah. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. This is a wonderful service that you're providing to the people here in Bangor and to the
community at large that's watching from home. I'm delighted to be here amongst so many distinguished guests and speakers. And I'm here to talk about the Protect Maine Elections campaign and why I am proud to support it. My name is Nathan Carlo. I have the honor of representing my hometown of Buxton, Maine, as well as Hollis, Maine, in the Maine State Legislature. And I'm voting yes on question 2 this November 7th, because it would prohibit companies under the influence of foreign governments from contributing to Maine referendum campaigns or financing political communications in support or opposition to candidates or ballot question committees. I've been asked by many of my constituents back home why this law is needed and whether or not we can rely on the federal government to assist us in stemming the flow of foreign influence in our state elections. Unfortunately, we can't, because a recent decision from the Federal Elections Commission ruled that it had no jurisdiction in state referendum campaigns, creating a dangerous loophole that allows corporations controlled by foreign governments to dump tens of millions of dollars in our elections in an attempt to reshape our home in their image and for their benefit exclusively. A yes vote on question 2 would close that loophole and put elections back in the hands of Maine people out of reach from foreign government-owned entities. In 2021 alone, a quarter of all election spending in Maine came from corporations controlled by these foreign governments. That's $22 million in just one election cycle, and $41 million during the last 3 years. No matter what your political stripes may be, and no matter how you vote at the ballot box, I think that we can all agree that there is way, way too much money in politics. And the Protect Maine Elections campaign is working hard to stop this influx of foreign spending in our elections. And in doing that, we can restore the power of the Maine people to self-determine our own future. Maine people certainly don't require the assistance of foreign governments to make decisions that impact our lives and livelihoods. We are fully capable of making those determinations all on our own. Governor Middleton, vetoing this legislation 2 years ago, named 5 Maine companies she thought would have been silenced by this bill. Well, we called them, and one by one, each of them confirmed that they would not have been impacted by the legislation at all. In closing, I just want to say our opponents are few, foreign, and financially unfettered. And we now have the opportunity to reclaim our voices as Mainers. And I hope that we will join the 82% of our neighbors who say they will be voting yes on this ballot question. Thank you again. And at the appropriate time, I'd be happy to take questions.
We also don't need a time limit for this portion because you're by yourself. So if you have more to say, you can say that. Feel free to go. I think we can get into the board of questions.
Well, I think that we are blessed that of all these citizen ballot questions so far, this is the most straightforward.
So I gave Representative Carlo a heads up about this. At some point, I may read some testimony that was provided to the legislature in opposition of the underlying bill, just so you all can hear part of that discussion. But I think for now, it makes sense to first proceed with some of the questions we've got from the audience. If we have time for that, we'll do that. But the first question is one that I think you've actually mostly answered in detail, so I might adjust it a little bit. But is this a real problem? And how much foreign money is currently spent on the elections? You said that, and so I'll add an addendum to the question is, do you know how that compares to other states? Is it a particularly large amount of money here in Maine?
Thanks for amending the question. It's obviously a major problem here in the state when you have $41 million from corporations controlled or influenced from foreign governments trying to influence our decisions at the ballot box. I think that campaign spending, where it comes from, is certainly a national conversation. The Protect Maine Elections campaign doesn't have, the data for other states. We're working hard to make sure that this passes on November 7th here in Maine. but we do know it's a national problem. We need to work hard to stem the flow of foreign influence at a national level and here at home. I will say a second component to the ballot measure is promoting an anti-corruption amendment to the United States Constitution. And that's important as well to know.
You want to just say it there, or you want to show it?
That might be.
Someone else had asked, if passed, can it be enforced in Maine, or does the US Constitution have to be amended?
The concise answer to that question is no. The United States Constitution would not have to be amended to in order for this ballot question to pass. A number of courts have ruled that our rights as American citizens are not transferable to foreign nationals or to foreign corporations. So the rights that we enjoy to speak freely on the state of our politics and to contribute to elections is not a right that is enjoyed by people from out of our country or from corporations out of our country. So a number of courts have confirmed that at the federal level, and an amendment would not be needed to incorporate that change. As I was saying, the second component to the ballot question, supporting an anti-corruption amendment to the Constitution, we would support, we would support an amendment to the Constitution that would tackle that as well. But in order for the main portion of the referendum to be enacted, would not require any constitutional change at the state or federal level.
Okay, I think that kind of covers this other question, so I'm going to set it aside now. And I think I know the answer to this question, so I'm going to tack something onto it again as well. The question is, would this include entities like Versal? I believe that it would, so I'm going to adjust that to say, do you know specifically which entities it is going to impact currently in the state of Maine?
Well, it would impact any company that has 5% or more foreign ownership, foreign government ownership. So companies like Versant are 100% owned by foreign governments. People who live in Versant territory are paying to pave the sidewalks in Calgary, Canada, which owns 100% of Versant. So if there is a company in Maine that has 5% or more foreign ownership, then they may be impacted by this legislation. But to be clear, Maine-based businesses will not be affected. The Maine government isn't allowed to involve itself or to spend money in referendums, so it makes very little sense to me why we would allow a foreign government to make those contributions in our elections. And I think that if you look at other countries, no self-respecting democracy would allow companies owned by foreign governments to influence their elections. So foreign companies with that ownership structure, where they're owned 5% or more by foreign governments, should not have that expectation here in Maine.
How did you and other supporters of this legislation arrive at that 5% threshold?
The 5% threshold is a threshold that is standard in securities and exchange law. I don't come from the business world. I am a school board member, so I got involved with the legislature because I care about education. And so in educating myself on the bill, I realized that 5% doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you're talking about multinational billion-dollar corporations, 5% is a lot of the share of the ownership for those companies. So it is a threshold that's commonly recognized in securities and exchange law. That requires certain disclosures to the FEC, and so that's where we arrived at that.
Okay, back to the Constitution. Didn't know this was going to be a constitutional lesson this evening, but we have some questions. Someone's wondering, They said they don't understand how Maine citizens voting for or against this proposal will impact the United States Constitution. And so to again add on to that, will impact the United States Constitution.
So passage of this ballot question would not require the federal government to adopt a constitution adopt an amendment to the United States Constitution. We are merely appealing to our federal delegation to support one if one were to come up.
And how do you define foreign in this instance? Does it apply only to other countries?
Foreign governments. Foreign governments.
That is all of the audience questions. We're almost out of time, but I was going to read a lengthy piece of testimony and then get your reaction to it. So I would say feel free to sit down for a moment so you don't have to stand up for all of it. But so for everyone in the audience, this is testimony against the underlying bill that led to this question. And it comes from the executive director of the Maine Forest Products Council. And that testimony says, the council opposes LD 1610 because a direct line could be drawn between the spruce bloodworm outbreak of the 1970s to 1985 and efforts to change Maine's timber harvesting laws at the Ballot. The scramble to salvage wood before it was killed or damaged set off alarms with environmental groups. The legislature passed the Forest Practices Act in 1989 to regulate harvesting, but the limits didn't allay all the concerns, and 3 referendums on clear cutting were fiercely debated in 1996, 1997, and 2000. All were defeated thanks to an industry-wide effort that included companies headquartered outside the U.S., but with business operations here. Maine's forest industry is an amalgam of companies from Maine and elsewhere around the world. The definition of a foreign-based government having 5% or more of total equity is a rule that would be very difficult to follow for businesses, including U.S.-based businesses that are publicly traded and may have foreign government pension funds as investors at any time. We support and appreciate business investments that have been made and are also actively marketing Maine to innovative companies in other parts of the world seeking new uses for wood. These organizations have an important responsibility to protect their investments from referendums like those in the past that threaten wood fiber supply for land managers and wood manufacturers alike. The Bill of Rights protects freedom of speech for all people, regardless of status or nationality. The Supreme Court has also ruled that the government cannot prevent corporations and unions from spending money to express their views in political elections. And so I cite that just because we don't have someone else on the side of this dais here to articulate any opposition. And so I'm just curious what your response to that argument is that, you know, companies, whether they be wood products folks or others, are doing business here in Maine and are affected by Maine public policy decisions. And therefore, some people feel that they should have the ability to weigh on those.
So I just want to say that in the legislature, I'm a very strong supporter of the Maine forest industry. I disagree with their conclusions on this bill. We had thorough debate in the legislature on whether or not Maine-based companies would be impacted by this legislation. And the reality is that they will not be. It was frankly, a Augusta swamp tactic to try to muddy the waters and make this vote a little less clear for Maine people to understand. In responding to the testimony that was just read, the Bill of Rights is ours to enjoy as Americans. Those rights cannot be transferred to people who live or the foreign corporations that are owned by Russia, for instance, or China, or Canada, or any other country. They are our rights, and they are important to preserve so that we can make decisions here in Maine that will benefit our future and not the foreign interests of other countries. So that's my response.
I think we have exhausted audience questions, unless there are any last people out there. So I think now is the time for your closing remarks. If you'd like to provide them, 2 to 3 minutes. We don't have a strict timeline because there isn't anyone following you.
Yeah, I don't. I think I've said all that I've needed to say on the subject. I'd be happy to, I'll stay until the end of the event if anybody wants to ask me any additional questions or talk more. You all have your evenings ahead of you, and your plans tonight don't include me. So I will leave the stage so that other speakers can come and speak.
Well, thank you, Representative Carlo. And so that concludes the question 2 portion. And now I believe, if I have my math right, we're going to jump to question 5, 6, and 7 with the Secretary of State. She would be willing to join me up here. And I think it's probably easiest if we just start with question 5. Would you be just willing to provide an overview of how we got here and what this means? Although I should read the question in advance before we get on. Let's see, question 5. Do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to change the time period for judicial review of the validity of written petitions from within 100 days from the date of filing to within 100 business days from the date of filing of a written petition in the office of the Secretary of State, with an exception for petitions filed within 30 calendar days before or after the general election? So, what the heck does that mean?
Ironically, so if you have any concerns about the first 4 questions, I wrote those. If you have any concerns about the last 4 questions, the legislature wrote those. But this essentially is an election from our perspective. And we did support this in the legislature, but I want to just very objectively describe what it is. The Maine Constitution tasked the Secretary of State with 2 obligations under the Constitution that are primary in elections. The first is administration of our elections, overseeing all of our municipalities, ensuring that every Maine citizen has the right to register to vote, cast their ballot freely, and know their ballot. The second is to safeguard the citizen initiative process, which resulted in these questions. Now, when the citizen initiative process was introduced to the Maine Constitution, I don't think it set the threshold of 10% of the most recent gubernatorial turnout for the required number of signatures. So obviously, gubernatorial turnout at the beginning of the turn of the 20th century was a lot lower in absolute numbers than it is today. What the Secretary of State's office does is literally go line by line on every single petition to verify the voter signature, look them up, ensure that they're a registered voter of the state of Maine, process to make sure that there are no duplicates, evaluate to make sure that no one's signing in the name of another or committing fraud. And so the Constitution sets that obligation with us. But the Constitution didn't envision was the Secretary of State in the middle of a gubernatorial election or a high-stakes presidential election, getting petitions, 26, 30 boxes, thousands of pages, tens of thousands of signatures, deposited on their doorstep the week before or the day before, even on election day itself. Because the Constitution says that we must stop everything that we're doing and certify those petitions. Well, what if we're running an election? That's what this judicial review, and just so everyone knows, under the Constitution and statute, we have 30 days to certify. And then there's an overall 100 days. So 70 days for court appeals. So proponents or opponents are not happy with the certification process, they can sue, they can go to court. But the overall period of time for review of those petitions is 100 days. So what this does, and if I were to write the question, I would say, do you favor creating a 30-day blackout window before and after a gubernatorial or presidential election to allow the Secretary of State to focus on elections and then certify petitions afterward?
My understanding is that the idea for this question came from the Secretary of State's, it's in your office's experience in 2022. So could you talk, is that correct?
Yes,
Could you talk a
that is
little bit
correct.
about that?
So in 2022, there were 11 civil service election officials. We have the longest serving election director in the country, Deputy Secretary Julie Flynn. She served under Republican and Democratic secretaries of state. She's a model. But imagine 11 election civil service state officials administering a high stakes gubernatorial election. Former Governor Paul LePage against current Governor Janet Mills, all of the legislative races. And suddenly the week before the 2022 election, on our doorstep, we get 2 of these referendum questions. 2 of these very laudable, all of the referendum questions, we don't have a position on them, but we support the citizens' right to petition, of course. And we have 30 days to ratify, which happened to be the Monday after Thanksgiving. Well, the election isn't over on election day. We have to certify the results for all of the more than 500 municipalities in the state. Then we have to conduct recounts. In this case, there were 3 state legislative recounts and 1 county recount. And we have to conduct ranked choice voting tabulations for any federal races. And of course, there was the ranked choice voting tabulation in the hotly contested CB2 race. So I mandated mandatory overtime for my staff, nights, weekends. I canceled everyone's Thanksgiving vacations. I do give them Thanksgiving off. And I rolled up my sleeves and sat down with them, looking at signatures on petitions and helping with the process. We got it done. I'm so proud of our election officials. We certified those petitions. You get them on the ballot this year. Again, keep in mind, it's a year ahead of time. We certified those petitions in 30 days. And we ran a safe, secure, and free election with the highest voter turnout in the entire nation.
Wow.
Maine was #1 in the nation. We put in a lot of hours, and some of the amazing people that worked with me last year are no longer working with the Secretary of State. They gave all so that they could run a successful election. That's what prompted me to approach Representative Laura Sedita here in Bangor and ask her, would you consider some sort of legislation to give us some constitutional relief, just a blackout window around spring elections?
Next question. Just also. Wondering who opposes this change, because I would like the question to look through legislative testimony, trying to find some opposition that could at least be read tonight. And I couldn't find any for question 5. So are you aware of anyone who opposes this change?
The votes were not unanimous in the House and Senate. There are some people who legitimately believe that the Constitution should not be amended in any way. And I understand and I respect those opinions. There are some people that say, well, why doesn't Maine invest in technology and automate petition review? Could you use artificial intelligence? Could you do, California and Oregon do some percentage verifications? They do scanning. There are a variety of different technologies. Isn't there a different way? Our constitutional obligation is to verify every signature. Now, there is an escape clause. If I decline to do that, it goes straight to the ballot. But imagine then the incentives for people to submit fraudulent signatures or submit signatures that are not adequate. And we have seen it in the past. We take our responsibility to certify those petitions and to make sure that those signatures are valid so that Maine voters know that they're voting on something that has been initiated by Mainers, regardless of your views.
Another obvious question, which I think is really 2 separate questions, but I'm going to ask them together, and if you feel like they need to be separated, please do that. But does this mean that petitions need to be to the Secretary of State's office 100 business days before it can appear on a ballot? And is this change from how things work now?
It doesn't change anything for petitioners because under the law, petitioners have until the end of January of the election year they wish to appear. So petitioners could have waited. Their deadline is the end of January to be on this November's ballot. The reason, the legitimate reason some petitioners chose the week before the election is their signatures are only good for about a year. So if you're gathering on election day, there's a significant incentive to submit right around election day, preferably right before election day. This doesn't change the rights of petitioners. It doesn't change the rights of those signatures. It doesn't change the deadlines. It doesn't change when those petitions are on the ballot. It just gives us a breather. It allows us to put those boxes in a locked room and take them up 30 days after a gubernatorial or presidential election.
So we have exhausted the audience questions on this question, but we also have you here for a couple more, but that's okay. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to offer on the question that we haven't covered?
We should be so proud. Our elections are free, safe, and secure. We have excellent election administration. We ask a lot of our municipal clerks. We ask a lot of our state election officials. And so I think it's really important to read the Constitution, become familiar with what the Constitution requires of our civil servants, and make your decision. Thank you.
Okay. And I should have offered this since we're going to be up here for a little while. Would you like to sit and we can separate this in? So we are going to then move on to question 6, and I will read that. And that is, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to require that all of the provisions of the Constitution be included in the official printed copies of the Constitution prepared by the Secretary of State?
So question 6 is really in part about the history of the Constitution of the state of Maine. So from a process perspective, you should know one of our obligations under the Constitution at the Secretary of State, and this happens through Maine State Archives, is to print the official version of the Maine Constitution every 10 years. This year we'll be printing it in vellum, and then we do print copies that we can send out to libraries, to schools, to anyone who wants them. Of course, private companies can also do reprints. It's often available online, but our responsibility is to print the official version as prepared by the Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Court and approved by the legislature. Now, the Constitution was amended at a constitutional convention to explicitly introduce Article 10, Section 7, which prohibits the printing of the Articles of Separation, including the Wabanaki Treaty obligations. So the Constitutional Convention at the time did not choose to delete those provisions or amend or repeal those provisions. Instead, they chose to amend the Constitution to say the Secretary of State shall not print those provisions. Maine State Archives looked in the archives to see if there was any historical record of the debate at the time. There was not. There were the minutes. Everyone voted in favor of it, and that vote total is in our historical archives at Maine State Archives, which is a remarkable place. But no record exists of that debate and why that decision happened. To our knowledge, it is the only Maine State only state constitution that has essentially a secret. It's not secret because you can get it online unofficially, but an unpublished version. So this is what this was brought forward by Speaker Rachel Talbot Ross and was approved by 2/3 of the legislature. Now, I think you have an opposition statement because this one actually did engender quite a bit of spirited debate.
I do have both a supportive and an opposing statement, so I can read from both of those now. If you think it'll jumpstart some more discussion. The opposing statement is from Jerry Reed, who is Governor Mill's chief counsel. And it's very long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. That might take the whole time on this question. Let's see. Amending the Constitution as these results proposed, however, would be a mistake for 2 reasons. First, it appears to be a misguided attempt to right a historic wrong that never occurred. There is no actual basis for the proposition that the Articles of Separation were removed from the printed copies of the Constitution as part of an effort to evade treaty obligations. Supporting this legislation would perpetuate that baseless theory. Second, although the proposed constitutional amendment would have no legal effect, not everyone will understand that. It is foreseeable that some will wrongly believe that once again, including the Articles of Separation in printed copies of the Constitution revitalizes 18th and 19th century treaty obligations. That is incorrect. Whether the Articles of Separation are included in printed copies of the Constitution is immaterial to their legal effect, but they remain part of the Constitution today, just as they have always been. But more importantly, the rights and responsibilities of the state and the Wabanaki nations are not defined by treaties, but instead the state and federal statutes that codified the Indian Land Claims Settlement of 1980. So that's just a small piece of a very long testimony from Jerry Reed, the chief legal counsel. And I think it's safe to say, based on your own testimony, that you don't agree with that perspective. Would that be fair?
Our testimony asserted two things. We believe in, or I believe in the sovereignty of Wabanaki nations, and that history is really important. I also believe that our official record and our official document should be inclusive of all parts of that document. And so that was in our testimony. I know the Wabanaki nations supported, tribal chiefs submitted testimony in support, and that certainly we were agreeing to disagree on this particular one.
I also have some of that testimony that I think that's helpful for folks. So this is an excerpt from testimony from tribal ambassador Molly Day from the Penobscot Nation, and she was also testifying in her role as president of the board of the Wabanaki Alliance. And the underlying bill for this was LD 78. So she said, LD 78 is a powerful truth-seeking measure, truth that lives whether we acknowledge it or not, truth that has far-reaching implications and consequences, truth that empowers us no matter what our background and informs our deeds and actions. Transparency is important, and historical documents give us a glimpse into the conditions of a world we are all still forced to grapple with and improve upon. We can only do that well if we are fully aware of our history. The treaty obligations found in this portion of the Maine Constitution lay the framework that was established when Maine became a state independent from Massachusetts. The Wabanaki people, my ancestors, were given space in this document, and that should not be ignored. Wabanaki people have been in this land for over 10,000 years, being good stewards and running some of the oldest continuous governments in the country. A key part of tribal sovereignty is having government-to-government relationships, and this has been something the state of Maine has struggled with, especially since 1980. We have made some really great progress, so why not let these original treaty obligations be seen and printed? So I don't want to transition from such a weighty topic but that does lead me to the next question, which is there any cost to this additional printing? I know that's a very administrative question, but this works from the very end.
So it's teaching me up well to advertise the Maine Citizen Voter Guide. And if you're online, just Google Maine Citizen Guide 2023. It has an objective. It has all of the questions. It has all the legislation behind each of the questions, so you can read for yourselves the statutory changes, the changes to Maine law that will happen if these questions pass. And it has the fiscal impacts as well. And we appreciate our partners at the Office of the Attorney General, the Treasurer's Office, and the legislative offices, the Office of Fiscal Policy Review, and OPLA. The fiscal note here was going to be minor costs, of course, because there would be a couple, more pages, certainly. But we can absorb those. We budget for the printing of the official constitution. Some additional text is not going to be something that we're going to need to see additional funding from the legislature for. We print things every day.
So the other two audience questions we have, you actually already answered with your historical overview. And we still have a few minutes left on this section. So I wonder if there are any questions that I haven't asked, things about this particular question that you were hoping to discuss before we move on.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that this question was well phrased by the legislature. I think it's fairly simple, and it's a question of perspective. I think the governor's office has made a case for continuing the historical tradition of omitting those provisions, and Wabanaki nations have made a case for printing those provisions. Now, of course, anyone can Google the full text of the unofficial constitution that has those provisions and find what those provisions are as well. But this would be, from my office, we would be very happy to print the Constitution in its entirety.
Okay, well, then I think we're going to move on to question 7. Maybe just a couple minutes ahead of schedule. It feels like a minor miracle. So we are going to move on to the Resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Maine to align the proceedings for circulating written petitions for people's vetoes and direct initiatives with federal law. And this one is, the question specific language is, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to remove a provision requiring a circulator of a citizen's initiative or people's veto petition to be a resident of Maine and a registered voter? Requirements that have been ruled unconstitutional in federal court.
So I see question 7 and question 8. They're substantive, but they're also housekeeping questions. Because it's really important for everyone to know that the United States Constitution trumps state constitutions, period. And so in this case, the Maine State Constitution long held that to circulate a petition, you had to be a registered Maine voter and a citizen or resident of the state. That was challenged by We the People PAC, Representative Billy Bob Fockingham's PAC, when they wanted to circulate a petition and they wanted to use circulators from outside the state of Maine. My predecessor, former Secretary Matt Dunlap, defended that lawsuit, and I inherited that lawsuit and continued to defend it. And we argued that if it is citizen-initiated legislation, it should be circulated by citizens of Maine, and the courts disagreed. While only Maine citizens can pass laws, can ratify or not ratify constitutional amendments, can vote in the voting booth, and vote we do in Maine, everyone has a free speech right, regardless of who you are or where you come from. You can come into Maine and you can talk to Mainers. You can speak about issues that you care about. You can circulate petitions according to the court. So regardless of whether you think the petitions should be circulated by Mainers or people from out of state, the courts have found that the United States Constitution says that out-of-state circulators have that freedom of speech to be able to talk to Mainers about issues of public concern, and Mainers then make the decision about whether to sign or not. And so I call them housekeeping amendments because Mainers may in fact reject the question, but I must follow the law as determined by the United States Constitution and interpreted by the courts. So regardless, and I told a crowd last night in Richmond that I hate saying this, but in this particular circumstance, voting always matters, but the practical legal impact of voting on this question and the subsequent question does not exist because voters do not choose to override the United States Constitution.
Is there any chance for potential, if it doesn't pass, does that lead to the potential for some sort of legal action, or are we just in the status quo? Either way, it doesn't really change your office's practice. It's just a matter of making sure the Constitution and current practice comport. Is that fair?
So this question is really interesting because, and I want to be careful not to step on question 8, but I want to talk about the process for me. When someone wants to circulate a petition, they reach out to my office. They propose legislation, and that's in the Citizens Guide. It's not just a question. It's pages and pages of text of statute that they want to initiate to change the laws. We review that. We work with the legislative offices to make sure that the statutory language is in adherence with Maine statutory guidelines. And then we send it back to them and say, is this the legislation that you wanted in the correct form? And they say yes or no. And then they are authorized to go and collect those signatures. So we send them instructions, how to do it, what to do, what not to do. And then they have 18 months to collect enough signatures to qualify for the ballot. We then have 30 days to ratify. So we feel that we have that power to communicate with the petition circulators very clearly because they have to come to us to get those petitions. They can't go online, get a form and start circulating without permission from us and guidance and guidelines from us. So all of the citizen-initiated questions that are on the ballot this November, we're operating under the new rules because the court decision is in early 2021. So all of the citizens' initiatives on this ballot could use both in-state and out-of-state circulators. It was their decision. May I add one more thing?
Of course.
Okay. And I think one thing that's important for people to recognize from a process perspective, citizens initiatives are always first. That's why the first 4 questions are citizens initiatives. That's laid out very clearly in terms of our directions. Constitutional amendments are always second. Citizens initiatives initiate with the citizenry. Constitutional amendments cannot be initiated by the citizenry. They can only be initiated by the legislature. The legislature, of course, can pass laws without citizen oversight, but they cannot pass a constitutional amendment without citizen review. So the process for a constitutional amendment is it starts in the legislature. It has to get 2/3 vote. So in all 4 of these amendments, Republicans and Democrats came together in the legislature, and 2/3 of the legislature passed those constitutional amendments out to the people. And then a simple majority of the people can ratify those. So I just share that just to share the process.
Well, once again, ask you to put yourself in the shoes of the opposition, even though you're not there. Because again, scouring legislative website, I think there was one piece of testimony against this, at least on record on the site. And it was from a resident who was generally concerned about changes to the Constitution in general. So besides that objection, are you aware at this point of anyone who's still objecting to this change? I know that you fought against it in court, but the courts have ruled. So beyond that, is there anything else out there that's going around in terms of opposition that I haven't been able to find?
Yeah. So I think that's really important. There may be people that have philosophical objections, including members of the legislature, including members of the Secretary of State's office. But one of the wonderful things about our country is we're a nation under the rule of law, right? So we follow the rule of law, we follow the laws. Whether we agree or disagree, we follow the United States Constitution. We think it should be changed, there's a process for change. And so I think what I heard from legislators was sometimes some rumbling. Shouldn't you have to be a Mainer to circulate petitions? But an understanding also, and I feel pretty passionately about this, we distribute the Constitution, the official version of the Constitution to libraries, to schools. We make that available. And we think it's really important that the citizens understand what the Constitution is and be able to go to the source documents. In an era of disinformation and misinformation, to be able to go and read the original documents. And so it's somewhat problematic when you have provisions that are not actually in effect. If someone goes and reads question 8, I find it's even more challenging and thinks, oh, I might not have the right to vote, or my neighbor might not have the right to vote. When in Maine, we're one of 2 states in the country where every Maine citizen has the right to vote, no exceptions, which is pretty special. So my concern about language that does not comport with the United States Constitution is it's challenging for someone to go to the source document and be like, that's the Constitution, that's the law of the land, if in fact it's been overturned, but not removed.
So have any more group questions, unless anybody has some time out there? I've exhausted mine. Is there anything else you wanted to add about question 7? Any of these questions that you've been so good enough to spend time talking through, or just the process in general?
So what I would like to say to everyone assembled here, regardless of how you view one question or any of the questions, participation is foundational to our democracy. And we are so proud in our state that we are #1 in the nation in 2022 in voter participation. And so it is my hope that proponents and opponents of all of these questions will turn out in huge numbers and exercise that right to vote, because that's really what our democracy is about. And from a process perspective, you should know, ballots are already available in most municipalities under state law. Every city and town must allow people to start voting in person in their municipal offices Tuesday. So 30 days prior to election, 30 days is over the weekend, so it's Tuesday. Everybody has that opportunity to vote. It's called no excuse absentee if they want to. Or you can wait till election day. Or if you want to vote by mail, you can call your town clerk, you can request a ballot online, you can go in person and take a ballot and take it home. And last but not least, it's not a test. So you don't have to memorize what you hear tonight or what you see online tonight. You can take the citizens guide, think about those questions, think about those issues. You can take your smartphone into the polling booth. You can request your ballot, bring it home, look online and see, what do I think about this before you fill it out? It's not a test. It's your right. It's your choice. So whatever you do, please vote. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Secretary of State Jennifer Owens. Good job, I believe. We are now going to move on to question 8, which is, I think, the last one. I don't think they've added any more on this last week or so. But, so Peter writes and disability rights management. Do you want to stand or sit? What do you prefer?
Stand for the moment.
Okay. So I will once again read the question and then we'll jump into some other questions both from the audience and a few from me probably as well. So this question is proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Maine to allow persons under guardianship for mental illness to be electors. And the question language itself is, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to remove a provision prohibiting a person under guardianship for reasons of mental illness from voting for governor, senators, and representatives, which the United States District Court for the District of Maine found violates the United States Constitution and federal law?
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Voters for inviting us to participate in this. It's really important. I'd like to echo what Secretary Ballot says. People should get out and vote. It's really important. It's crucial. I also want to thank Secretary Ballot for saying a lot of the things that I'm going to say. Because she's correct. It is this. Oh, sorry. Question 8 is in many ways could be considered a housekeeping measure. People under guardianship by reason of mental illness can vote, and they're going to vote on November 7th. They're going to vote in next year's presidential election. This provision has been declared unconstitutional. It violates the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. It violates the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution, and it violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's discriminatory. So there's, and I think it's really important for the Constitution to reflect reality. For the Constitution, when you read the Constitution, what we're concerned about is people may read that and say, well, I can't vote, or some, a clerk may say, well, you're under guardianship for using mental illness, you can't vote because that provision is in the Constitution. They should be allowed to vote. Everybody should vote. Everybody should be allowed to vote. And so it's really, important. And I think there's a moral issue. And that is, people by reason of people who have mental illness should not be discriminated against. I mean, they have the same rights as everyone else. And they should not be singled out and said, you cannot vote because of your diagnosis. That just is wrong, I think.
So we have one question. I'm actually not sure at this point if it's from the audience or a previous question that was submitted before the event. But the question is, since a federal court has ruled that a restriction to allow individuals under guardianship to vote violates the U.S. Constitution, would a no vote mean there would be lawsuits in Maine regarding the ability to vote?
No, the short answer, again, reflecting what Secretary Ballot said, it has been declared unconstitutional. It's void. It's unenforceable. People who are under guardianship by reason of mental illness can and will be voting. And
But if Maine fails to update the constitutional language with a no vote, could that maybe lead to legal action?
I don't think so, because there'd be nothing to challenge. That provision is superfluous. It's meaningless. It's void. It's in the Constitution. It shouldn't be there. It's a repeal. It's long overdue, and people should support, amending the
as Secretary Ballot said, the only way within the Maine Constitution is for the legislature, two-thirds of the legislature to vote a resolution and then for the citizens of Maine to then vote, and which they will do on November 7th. And majorities of people voting to repeal that election.
So just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, regardless of what happens in this referendum result, the status quo is going to be the status quo. Okay. And so you had a heads up about this, just to let the audience know, again, this is not legislative testimony, but I am going to read, again, because I could not find any legislative testimony against this underlying bill. But a columnist at the Bangor Daily News did write in opposition to it today, actually. And so just to be clear, this is from media columnist Matt Gagnon, who is a columnist. He doesn't work for the paper, but he does have a weekly column with us. And so as Peter is aware, I'm going to read a section, and then as we have done previously, get his reaction. And just to emphasize, as I did with the legislative testimony, the opinion of the testimony, not mine, I'm just reading it for discussion's sake. So he writes, in the Maine Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, to be specific, there is a provision that states that individuals with mental illness under guardianship are not allowed to vote. Guardianship, which is sometimes known as conservatorship, is defined as a legal proceeding where a person or entity, the guardian, is granted the authority to make decisions for another person, the ward. This could be any person experiencing certain mental health challenges, including elderly Mainers who are experiencing a cognitive decline. The intent of this text is to ensure that people who do not have the capacity to make their own decisions are not voting. This is, of course, common sense, as people who are unable to reason through decisions cannot be expected to make informed choices in elections. They are also possible targets for those who wish to manipulate them for their own purposes. The problem, though, comes from the use of guardianship as the standard by which the state would judge mental incapacity. Undeniably, many, if not most, people who are under guardianship are unable to make critical decisions, but it's everyone. He goes on to reference the situation with Britney Spears and her conservatorship, but I'm not sure we need to dive into that here. But just skipping around a little bit. However, by getting rid of the guardianship language, there is no denying that some Mainers who cannot reason through a voting decision will be able to vote. Even though advocates admit as much, in his testimony at the public hearing for this question, John Brodigan of Legal Services for the Elderly acknowledged that his organization does not question the fact that some citizens who have the right to vote no longer have the capacity to vote. This leaves us with two options, both of them bad. If we vote yes, we remove a constitutional provision that seeks to prevent those who can't make rational decisions from voting. If we vote no, we undoubtedly prohibit people who actually can reason through decisions from exercising a right they should possess, and we leave a provision on the books that has been ruled invalid. A better option would have been to propose an amendment to the language that was much more specific and narrowly tailored to more clearly define who was and was not capable of voting. But that isn't the option presented to us. Instead, we are asked to simply eliminate it entirely or do nothing at all. So I'm going to ask a very leading question. Do you agree?
No. In the first place, he's incorrect. And as we just said, people under guardianship by reason of mental illness can't vote now. So that's wrong, just flat out wrong. Second of all, I mean, for anybody who's interested, I have copies of Judge Stimler's opinion in this case. Voting is a fundamental right. If you're going to take away somebody's fundamental right, you have to have a compelling reason, and it has to be narrowly tailored to address that. Not allowing people by reason of mental illness because of some claimed incapacity to reason to vote is it's not narrowly tailored. People who are under guardianship by reason of intellectual disability have a statutory right to vote. People under guardianship because of dementia can vote. So this is not narrowly tailored to address the concern that the columnist is raising. And as I said, second of all, it's just flat out wrong. People under guardianship by reason of mental illness can vote, and as I say, will vote. I mean, they will be voting in favor of this repeal.
So my condensed summary of Matt Gagnon's thesis would be that he supports the need for a change, but not the way the question 8 would specifically do it. Was there a discussion either in the legislature or in the development of this question about the way of doing it? Was this the only way to do it, or were there various options that may have in order to comport with that legal ruling?
I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know what happened in the legislature. We didn't know about this until Senator Hickman, put it in and it passed. And then Kim Moody, who is the executive director of Disability Rights Maine, has a public comment in the Citizens Guide that Secretary Zello mentioned if anybody wants to read that as well. There's an opinion from the, or I guess not opinion, a comment from the Attorney General's office about this as well.
Okay, we have an audience question, which is, do you have any guesses on how many people might self-censor that is not vote because of the current language?
I do not. I mean, I don't know how many people will not. I mean, obviously, people know about this. This is a ballot. This is a ballot vote, so and it's being discussed. And so people may think that as of right now that they cannot vote. And I have no idea how many people that is. We're telling people they can vote. We know that people in the with psychiatric diagnosis are telling other people that they can vote. But still, people may say, well, I can't vote. And that's really a shame. That's really terrible.
I'm just wondering, and this might be outside the scope of what we're talking about here, but how do other states handle this? Is Maine unique in confronting this question and the legal issues, or?
Secretary Ballot is the one that Maine is one of the few states that allows everybody to vote. So I'm just going to quote her.
Okay. Does anybody in the audience have any more questions? Peter, were there any other specific elements that you were hoping to discuss tonight?
No, I'm not that I can think of right now, but I just think it says something for Maine to repeal this, says something about how we feel about people with disabilities, that they should be afforded every right that everyone has. They should not be singled out and not allowed to vote because of a mental illness, a psychiatric diagnosis. That is just fundamentally unfair and mischaracterizes people. I know people with mental illness who follow politics very closely, and they are very informed about, what they're going to vote on and who they're going to vote for and why. And why not?
Well, we've exhausted the good questions, and we've exhausted my questions. So, Peter, thank you very much for joining us. And I think that concludes both our section and the entire event. So thank you for finishing up for us. Barbara, McKay, do you have anything to add? Thank you very much.
Thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Matt Younger for moderating tonight. I think the last 2 nights we learned an awful lot. I certainly have. And I invite everyone to come to the final forum of the week. Tomorrow night at Gracie Theater, our cousin is the candidate site for Bangor City Council and Bangor School Committee. So I hope you come out for that too. I want to thank our speakers very much. I know you all traveled very much, but it was fascinating to me. I learned a lot, and I appreciate it very much. I want to thank the library for being one of our sponsors, and with your needs, and with women voters, the Bangor Women Voters of Maine. And Nancy for being our timekeeper. I think that's it. Go home. Don't forget to vote. Please vote. However you vote, vote.